A conversation with my dad, one that I've never had before. I decided to ask him what his time was like during the Navy. I was really interested in why he wanted to join the Navy because during this time, it's not like there was any real conflicts going on with the UK or any other countries, so I wanted to know what were his motivations and why he wanted to actually join the Navy.
So why did I join the Navy? I was originally thinking about joining the Army, but my Uncle Kevin that was in the Army at the time, he did his full 22, and he was advising that there were changes going on and it might not be the best out of the armed forces for myself, so then I looked at the Navy. At one point I was considering to become an officer, but there was also a branch, the Artificers, where essentially you did a technical college first and then joined the Navy as an engineer, and that's what I ended up doing. It had a fast track scheme into becoming a senior rate, which was attractive as well because it gave you seniority, and obviously it also had more money, which when you're a young man, that was quite interesting. So it was a 4-year apprenticeship scheme, which was like 2 years of naval college, and then a year at sea, putting that into practice, and then the final year of technical training before you got your qualifications, and then you got let loose into the wide world.
I was really interested to find out what my dad's goals were in life, especially during his time in the Navy, because you can achieve so much through the ranks. So I loved hearing how his goals had shifted throughout his life and how I impacted them.
What were my goals for joining the Navy? I think at the time, I don't think there was any long-term career goals. It was more of a case of that's what I wanted to do, and it also got me out of the house and doing something more exciting than your average day-to-day job. Essentially I was going to get paid to travel the world and hopefully have some exciting times that came along with it. As I progressed through my career, then things did change. I mean, going to work on a Monday and coming back 8 months later certainly started to lose its appeal, particularly once I wasn't a young single man anymore. I now had a wife and then starting to be a young family as well, being new. That certainly changed the outlook upon things, but it was going to be a firm standing to hopefully open up other avenues for me later on in my career.
I was hesitant to choose my dad to do this interview podcast because I wasn't sure how I would respond to listening to hard times or dark, traumatic times he experienced during his time in the Navy, and I wasn't sure he'd want to talk about it with me, his own daughter.
Have I had any traumatic or hard times when in the Navy? There are definitely good days and bad days with any job, but if you have something that happens when you are several thousand miles away from home and you're in the middle of the sea, then it certainly makes things a little bit more harder. I can remember one instance where I was on HMS Richmond and we were escorting the Royal Yacht around the UK as her final voyage before she got decommissioned, and whenever you're in the company of the Royal Yacht, then there are certain other rules and regulations that are put in place to make sure that you don't disturb the royal family and their guests. So one of those restrictions that were put on us is that the outside broadcast system on the ship was isolated, so that if we made any pipes over the tannoy system, then this was not going to disturb any parties that were going on in the Royal Yacht. Unfortunately, one of the days when I was on duty in Liverpool, we ended up with a fire on the foremast, and so when they were making the announcements over the broadcast systems, anyone on the upper deck did not realise that there was a fire going on, so that made life a little bit more complicated. Luckily, the first responders put this out within the first 5 minutes, so the fire never spread and it was quickly isolated, but that could have easily have become something more problematic due to these extra restrictions.
One question that I was very eager to ask my dad about was his relationships that he developed during his time in the Navy, because one of the most important ones to his life and my own life is that he met my mom in the Navy, and I was really excited to hear their story and how they met. And I was also really excited to learn about all of our close family friends, because all of my aunts and uncles and my parents' friends, they've all met during the Navy, so everyone has really close bonds. And I was really excited to learn the backstory to all of my close family members.
What relationships have I achieved throughout my time in the Navy? I think I can honestly say that some of my best and longest lasting relationships have come from my time in the Navy. One of the most obvious ones is obviously your mother. I met her, she was in the same class that joined up with myself and then ended up coming to the same technical college that I went to. Some of our longest friends, who we're still friends with now, were also part of that same entry that joined up on the 6th of January 1992. And we keep in touch with them regularly now. Whenever we're over in the UK, we go and see them. We're in touch via social media, so yeah, you get some great relationships from being in the armed forces. For each of my drafts, whether it be a shore draft or on a different ship, I end up getting some great associates that come with those. Some of those end up turning into long-lasting friendships as well. So Mark Balston ended up being my best man at the wedding, and he's someone that I worked alongside on HMS Richmond. So yeah, you honestly get some of the best relationships you'll ever have.
Although I knew my dad hadn't seen any action or been involved in any combat fighting, I was still interested in hearing about if he experienced a loss of innocence during his time on the ships, because being far away from friends and family, or even just being far away from an actual home and having to live on a ship, can be very hard and isolating to someone, especially during the early stages of a young man's life when they're normally out finding girls and learning in a typical college. I wanted to know if these hard times shaped him into the man he is today.
Loss of innocence. I'm not so sure I lost any innocence by doing this. I think I can say that it certainly helped me grow up fast. I mean, I joined the Navy just before my 17th birthday, so whilst I may have thought I was a young man, I was really just a big kid. And it helps you grow up fast. You're given responsibilities early on, and how to deal with those responsibilities shapes you going forward, and your childlike manners are drilled out of you very, very quickly. But I don't think I've been in any positions where my innocence has been compromised.
Hearing about how my dad's experience in the Navy was one of the best experiences in his life, I was really interested into hearing why he chose to leave, because he didn't finish his full 22-year service during the Navy. So learning as to why he actually chose to leave instead of completing those years was really intriguing.
Why did I leave the Navy? Initially, when you join up in the UK Armed Forces, you're signing on for 22 years of service, and even then, that is from the age of 18. So for myself, because I joined up just before I was 17, I was really signing up for 23 and a bit years, which at the time I didn't have a problem with at all. So obviously at that point I was a young single man. Over time I ended up with a girlfriend who became my fiancée, became my wife, your mother, and so the pressures of going away for long periods of time certainly don't seem as attractive as they did beforehand. Throw in the fact of when you came along, I was on HMS Montrose at the time, and I worked out that by the time that draft was finished, you were going to be 4.5 at best, because I was on a Plymouth-based ship and we lived in Portsmouth. I was coming home late on a Friday evening, leaving on a Sunday afternoon, and that was when the ship was alongside. Obviously when it was at sea, I was completely away, and I decided that that was not what I wanted for bringing up a young family. So decided that that career would not be suitable for sustaining that, and so I decided to leave to spend more time with you, your sister and your mother.
After hearing all the different stories and recollections my dad had of his time during the Navy, I was really interested in finding out how much of an impact this actually had on his life, because although he doesn't speak much of his time in the Navy, we still have so many connections to it through family members and close friends. So hearing about how he still tries to stay connected with the Navy was really interesting.
What do I still live with now from my times in the Navy? As I mentioned before, a lot of my friends, true long relationship friends, they're still linked to the Navy in one way, shape or form for most of them. In fact, one of them is still in. He's probably one of the longest serving senior rates that the Navy has. Some of them are now working in the defence industries that are going to support the Navy, and that's what they've now chosen to extend their career with. I follow several of the social media sites that are linked to them, so I'm fully aware of some of the new ships that are coming along, and I'm curious about where those contracts get placed as well, because that's going to have an impact upon some of my friends because they are in the defence industry. So I still feel proud of everything that I did. I'm part of that family, and I'm pretty sure if any of the ships came alongside where we happened to be at the time, I'd probably want to go along and talk to the people in there, have a wander around, see what's going on. So yeah, it was a big part of my life, and I think I'll always be interested in what's going on.
I'm glad my dad shared his experiences in the Navy with me, because I was able to learn not only about his history, but almost my history. And I was able to learn how much of an impact that still has on him, and my mom too, and all of our close family friends. It was really interesting learning about all his experiences and how he dealt with those experiences later on in life. I'm glad I had this conversation with my dad.